Okay, so up to now, we've obviously been talking about language abilities in humans specifically, because as far as we know, humans are the only species that really uses a language. However, I just kind of want to argue that that really depends on how we define language, which we saw at the very beginning, that it's really difficult and tricky to come up with a definition that captures what language really is. And if we want to say that only humans have language, then it becomes even more difficult, because then we have to come up with a definition that captures what language is, but also excludes all these things that we know other species can do. So I just want to give you some examples of what we know other species can do, and we can kind of talk about, whether that justifies saying that they use language or not. Most of the really exceptional linguistic abilities have been demonstrated in other primates. There is specifically a few bonobos and chimpanzees that have been raised in, human captivity, basically, and have learned all kinds of very interesting language abilities. Some of the earliest ones basically learned like sign language, so they could use, essentially sign language to communicate. Their sign language was a little bit primitive, so they had a pretty large vocabulary, but they couldn't necessarily like chain things together to form, whole sentences necessarily. And in more modern times, there are primates that use, technology basically to communicate. So this first video I'm going to show you is a bonobo named Kanzi. Kanzi, I think he passed away pretty recently, but he lived most of his life actually in Des Moines, Iowa. So I've actually met Kanzi and been around him. I've been at the facility that I'm going to show you in just a minute. So we'll see kind of what his abilities are. Maybe I'll tell you some stories of the craziness that I experienced there as well. But so this is Kanzi using this board that's called a lexigram board. So a lexigram is a symbol that basically designates a word, but the symbol, it's not a picture, it's not letters, it's just kind of like a unique random symbol that's been, paired with a particular word for Kanzi to learn. So you're going to see him basically just demonstrating all his different lexigrams.
Banana.
Banana.
Very nice.
Banana. Banana.
Can you find peanuts?
Peanut.
Thank you. Will you find eggs?
Sherman. Egg.
Good. Can you find milk? Milk.
Milk.
Good. How about apple?
Apple.
Very good. How about Sue?
Sue.
Very good. Can you find peanuts?
Peanut.
Very nice.
Peanut.
How about eggs? Egg.
Egg.
Great, Kanzi. How about chow? Have you had any chow in a while? See that chow lately?
Chow.
Okay, so that goes on for quite a while, but you can see, he has this board that has like hundreds of these lexigrams, and he has just completely memorized like what each one means. So here she's testing him, just testing his memory, like asking him to push the correct button. But he also actually uses this board to communicate on a daily basis. So anytime he wants, something like a banana, he wants to go outside, he wants to do whatever, he uses this board to communicate with the people at the facility to let them know what he needs. So he has, a huge vocabulary memorized. In addition, he is able to understand sort of more complex grammatical concepts. So in this video that I'm going to show you, the same researcher is basically giving him commands, telling him to do different tasks. And all these tasks are pretty simple, but they involve like taking one object and interacting with another object in a very specific way. And the way he interacts is going to depend on the grammar of that sentence, like which, object comes first in the sentence, which one is the object versus the subject. And all of these are things that up until this video was recorded, he had never done that specific thing before. So they're all novel sentences, that he's never heard. So we'll watch this. They start out kind of simple, and then they get like more and more silly as the video goes on.
Kanzi, could you cut the onions with your knife? Well, that's very good. Thank you. Could you put some soap on your ball? Well, that's a good job. That's very nice. Thank you. Kanzi, can you put the pine needles in the refrigerator? Good job, thank you. Kanzi, are you listening? Could you put some soap in the water? Good job, thank you, thank you. Could you listen again? Okay. Kanzi, could you pour a little Coke in the water? Could you pour some Coke in the water? Thank you, that's enough. You can, okay. Kanzi, pour the Perrier water in the jelly. Thank you, that's good, that's good. You see the TV set? Could you take the TV outdoors? Could you carry the television outdoors, please? Thank you.
All right, so I think that demonstrates pretty well that at the very least he understands language, right? I mean, he's like understanding all these commands she's giving him. There, like I said, some people have argued, like there's a lot of people that want to say humans only have language, so they argue against a lot of these studies that they see other researchers doing. And some of the earlier ones, they had argued that he, was being trained to do these very specific tasks, and so he didn't understand the grammar of the sentence. He just understood, this specific command means this specific thing. But that's demonstrating, like I said, all those were completely novel. He had never put soap on a ball before for any reason. So they're all like brand new things that he just has to understand the meaning of the sentence and then do it. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to say about Kanzi. I think Kanzi's the most advanced, so they have some other bonobos and things that at the same facility that they've tried to teach, and Kanzi, just excelled for whatever reason at learning these different tasks. But there's other bonobos that can do similar things. The other thing I'll mention, and we'll see kind of an example of this in a second, is that oftentimes when researchers are talking about animals having other language, they're narrowing it down to this other animal can communicate with humans, which is a little strange if we think about it, right? Like we all agree that we can use language, but we can only use that language to talk to other humans. It's not like I have to be able to communicate with, a monkey in order for me to have language. So it's a little weird that we put these barriers of like, okay, we're only going to call it language if they can communicate with another completely different species, which is us. There are some researchers that have tried to study more like intra-species language, like how, within a species they communicate with each other. One of the primates that's been really studied for that are these gelada monkeys, which I'll show you in just a second. So these gelada monkeys, researchers became interested in them partially because they have very complex verbalizations and vocalizations that they can do. So they can make all kinds of very complex sounds with their mouths that other species, can't necessarily. Like if we think of a dog can bark, they can whine, right? But they can't really necessarily make lots of different complex sounds, whereas these gelada monkeys can. So this first video, very short, but you can hear some of the different sounds that they make in this first one. So there were, some in the background you might not hear as well, but they, there's the screeching sound, there's this, they call it wobbling, where they do that more like, it sounds like wobbling, I guess, kind of sound that they make. So they can make all kinds of complicated sounds with their mouths. And there's also research that shows that they have very specific sounds that mean different things. So for example, they live, kind of in these savannas that are wide open, and one of their main predators are snakes. So there's, certain snakes that will attack them, but then there's also predatory birds that will sometimes attack them, like, big hawks and things. So they have one call that means snake, and so if one of the members of the group makes that sound, then all the other members, even if they don't see the snake, they're nowhere close to it, they will go and run and like hide up in a tree. But if they make another sound when there's like a hawk coming, then the whole group will go and hide under the tree instead of climbing up in it so that the hawk can't like swoop down and get them. So they use those calls to basically communicate like, hey, there's a snake, or hey, there's a hawk, so that they can all get to a safe space. This is another video that shows, this one's a little lengthier and shows more complex kind of social interactions between them. And there is a lot of sound going on here, so you'll hear that. But it's also just to kind of demonstrate how social they are and how sort of complex their social structure is. Because often the species that are most likely to use language are going to be ones that are social, because that's the whole point of language, is to communicate with, another member.
Groups of mothers and their young, a harem, gather together to form troops of up to 800 monkeys. Gelada's hands are usually busy plucking grass instead of grooming, so to keep in touch, Geladas have become the chattiest of all monkeys. The gossipy banter can sound to scientists like sentences with words or even names for each other. Most agree it's often used to defuse tension. And in Geladas, there's a lot to be tense about. There are gangs of young males trying to steal away the women from the family harems. Each handful of females is guarded by a single male, the harem master. The spare boys try and tempt the girls away, hoping the resident father figure doesn't notice. The males flash teeth at each other. They may fight, but it's usually just showing off in case the girls are watching. There's a lot of flirting on both sides. And then, if an innocent-looking female is tempted to wander off past her guardian, he has to decide what to do. Girls mostly sneak off secretly for affairs. This is a blatant challenge to his authority. The illicit couple just sit. The suitor seems to be using his hand to hide his grimace. He probably doesn't want trouble. Chimps, baboons and macaques may also try to look innocent when they break the rules. This is a complicated social problem. Using your brain to control societies is called Machiavellian intelligence, after a 16th century courtier who wrote on manipulating political power. Instead of launching into an attack, the politician here tries to grab a baby. Monkey etiquette dictates nobody attacks anyone holding a baby, so they're like living flak jackets. The mothers are worried and quickly scoop up the youngest. Here, the two males face each other. The family man backs towards one of his more loyal wives, calling for support. One of the youngsters suddenly switches from mother to father. This should calm things down. With the youngster attached, the father's protected, and the harem should unite. But it can go wrong. The youngster is slipping off. The family are frantic. The harem master has no protection from attack. The bachelor is finally driven off with a little help from the mothers. But the fathers are meant to guard the precious young. He knows he's in all sorts of trouble. If the infant dies, the mothers may not support him again. Our brain, too, wrestles with our own similar problems. We are as social and as competitive.
All right, so that's the gelada monkeys. Again, I think a good example of all the different sounds they make and kind of how they interact socially. One of the difficult things, obviously, is studying this in a fully scientific way. So a lot of the things that we have are more like anecdotal. It's like there's this one primate or this one whatever, this one instance where we see things. It's very difficult in these studies to get like large amounts of data that can be, sort of scientifically analyzed in an unbiased way. So that's one of the challenges here. Okay. So that's primates. There's, I'm sure, tons of other examples, but those are kind of the highlights of the ones that I think are most interesting. Any questions about those before we move on to dogs? Yeah, Kim.
Okay. Language, not just like verbal language, not like body language at all?
So that we kind of talked about this a little bit at the beginning of class, but I mean, it sort of depends on what we decide is our definition of language, right? I would say that constricting it to only verbal language doesn't make sense to me, because I would say sign language is very obviously like a fully robust language system that doesn't use anything verbal at all. And so yeah, it kind of just depends on what our definition of language is, essentially.
And do you think babies understand animals more than we can because of that differential age when they switch over, so they can maybe recognize more sounds than we could?
That's an interesting point. I've never seen anyone do a study to see like maybe, an infant could pick up the difference between like my dog might bark and it might sound the same to me, but maybe those barks have different, phonemes in them that I can't perceive, and maybe the infant would be better at it. I don't know. No one's ever done that study that I know of. That would be very interesting to look at, though. There are newer studies looking into animal language or trying to use more like computer algorithms to try to figure this out. So basically get a huge set of sounds from a particular species and have an algorithm trained to try to find those different phonemes. Those are really, really new, and I haven't followed them closely enough to know if there's any updates on, them finding anything interesting. But that's another approach. But yeah, I hadn't thought about using infants to do that. That would be interesting. Okay, so we've got primates, to demonstrate that they can use human language, they can understand it, they can memorize large amounts of vocabulary, and then also within their species, they're doing very complex communication. Another species that's been studied a little bit is dogs, probably just because of our close relationship to them. It makes it a little easier to study. Some of the most recent examples I've seen of dogs using language, and you guys might have seen this too, are dogs who are trained to use these buttons to talk. And these buttons become almost kind of like Kanzi's lexigram board a little bit. So this is one example of kind of one of the more famous ones. This is a dog named Bunny that has been trained to use all these different buttons. This started, though, with a woman named Christina Hunger. She has a book talking about how she developed this method. So she was one of the first people to do it. That's not this dog, but another one. She has a dog named Stella. And Christina is actually a speech pathologist. So she worked with young kids, trying to help them if they had issues where they couldn't communicate verbally. She would work with them to try to find strategies to help them. So she had all these, devices that the children she was working with would use to communicate. And she got a puppy at some point while she's working with that and realized that this puppy shows kind of the same markers of progress that we talked about earlier. So the puppy seems to be able to, understand certain commands or whatever that are very simple and then sort of built up over time. So she saw kind of this parallel between the kids that she worked with and her dog. So she started using these buttons to try to get her dog to communicate. And then a bunch of people have kind of taken that and applied it as well. So this dog named Bunny. So this just kind of shows how these buttons work.
Hi, my name is Alexis Devine, and this is my dog Bunny the Conversationalist.
Yesterday, Bunny went play tango. Bunny want play tango today? Yes. Okay.
She's a 1.5-year-old Sheepadoodle. We are currently using buttons to communicate. They're right back here as part of a study through the Comparative Cognition Lab at UCSD. So when we first brought Bunny home, I had an outside button waiting by the door for her with sort of no expectations of how far we'd get with this journey. Within a few weeks of modeling it, she was using it consistently herself to request to go outside. And at that point in time, we added it to a larger board. And about 6 months into our journey, We came into contact with Leo Trottier and switched to his device, which is grouped based on the Fitzgerald key, which helps her to compartmentalize words.
Love you too.
So we'll usually have between 2 and 3 doggy play dates a day as per her requests. She also really likes the walk button for obvious reasons. So one of my favorite parts about working with Bunny is just building the trust that we have. And, you know, building trust takes a really long time. You know, you have to go through some challenging moments in order to learn about the other person or the other animal that they deserve your trust. Mad. Why are you mad? Why mad? So that particular interaction took place over about 15 minutes. The first part of the interaction, she says mad, and I say, why are you mad? And she says, ouch. So I was a little bit skeptical when I responded, like, where is your ouch? 5 minutes later, she walked back over to the board and she pressed stranger. And I said, where is the stranger? And she said, paw. Walked up to me and placed her left paw in my hand, and I felt between her toes because she had recently said ouch just in case, and I found a foxtail sort of embedded in a mat that was between one of her toes. And just always exploring new combinations of words and trying different ways to get her message across if I, as a human, am not understanding what she's trying to say, which is really...
All right, I'll stop it there. So I think that kind of demonstrates, you know, how she's using these buttons to communicate in really interesting ways. I've had a hard time. I've tried to find more videos of these dogs using buttons, and it's kind of hard to find good examples. I would recommend definitely reading that book by Christina Hunger if you're interested in this, because she talks about, you know, all kinds of different interactions she had with her dog. I thought this one was interesting just because it shows how the dog is also using the words in kind of novel ways. So she had this thing in her paw, and it's not like she has a button for the foxtail or whatever the thing was that was in there. So she has to kind of get creative and like think of like, okay, how can I communicate? There's this thing in my paw. So she uses the word stranger to communicate, like, you know, it's something that shouldn't be there, basically. So it's almost like she's taking this word and understanding a meaning of it and then applying it to a novel situation. So yeah, so really interesting use of buttons there. Yeah, Alex.
This is interesting because the way I think of language, I was skeptical as to the primate stuff you were showing previously.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that this dog used the buttons to communicate a more complicated idea and actually come up with a solution.
Yeah.
That to me was the first time today where I've been looking at these animal stuff and saying, that was actually really impressive.
Yeah, that's interesting that, I hadn't thought of it that way, that they're not just, because in a lot of cases they're using buttons to say, I want food or I want walk. And it's like, you know, that you can almost break down to the behaviorist view of you're just, you know, rewarding this thing. But here, like you're saying, they're using it in a really novel way to try to solve a problem that they're not able to solve themselves. So yeah, that's interesting. I bet if I looked, I could find examples of that in primates. I just hadn't thought of it that way. So I'll do some digging and see. But yeah, and I'm sure we all also have had like interactions with dogs where maybe, you know, we've seen that you can say something to a dog and sometimes it feels like they understand more than you would expect them to. You know, I have 2 dogs. I've grown up with lots of dogs around me, and there are often times where I have a moment where like I'll just say, like, I talk to my dogs all the time, not really expecting that they understand me, more just, you know, because I'm weird, I guess. But you know, sometimes they'll like respond in a way or understand something that I wouldn't expect them to. So yeah, but again, it's like hard. It's like, okay, but all this is so anecdotal, you know? And so it's like, can you really from that say that these species use language? I don't know. Some other species that really excel in linguistic abilities are different birds. So the 2 examples I have are parrots. I think the second one is technically a raven, which is, I guess, technically different from a crow, but it's been shown in crows as well. So parrots are interesting because they're the only species of all of these that can actually like verbalize and vocalize the same way that humans can. So we'll see an example of a parrot, this African gray parrot named Alex, who was, you know, one of the most intelligent parrots that they've demonstrated before. Alex died, I think, in 2007. And I don't know if they've continued research with other similar parrots or not. But yeah, let's just watch the video and see some of the things he can do.
Alex, what matter? That's right.
How many?
2.
That's right. You're a good boy. No, sweetie. No, you can't go back yet. You gotta.
You want some water?
All right. Do you want some water, or are you just asking to interrupt? You're just asking to interrupt. I know you.
Go back?
I know you. Okay. Look. What color bigger? What color bigger? Green. Oh, you're a good boy. Okay, Alex, look. Look what I got for you. Hey, look. Look at all these neat toys. Look. Hey, look, can you tell me, on the tray, how many green block? Green block.
2.
Good parrot. 2 green block. 2. Good parrot. One of the things Alex doesn't have is a knee-jerk response to the types of objects that you present him. He can look at 2 objects and answer several different types of questions about those objects, or he can look at a novel collection of items and answer questions about that collection. What this shows us is that he really understands what those questions mean.
The whole thing.
Listen, Alex.
You're
That's right,
good
teacher.
boy.
Alex describing objects. Alex saying, Polly want more than a cracker.
Is what you want? I want banana. Carrot.
Good birdie.
I want corn. Soft corn.
Soft corn, good parrot. We've got rock corn, that's dried corn, and we've got soft corn too.
Cold.
It's cold, yes, it's cold. It's from the refrigerator.
Go pick up corn.
Well, no, I'm not going to pick up the corn you threw down.
Using his beak, he could tell you what matter objects were made of.
Rock.
Good boy.
Rock.
What matter?
What matter, Alex?
What? Good
right.
boy. Whoa.
That's right. Whoa.
And amazingly, on a tray, he could tell you the number of squares from the number of balls, the number of each color.
How many blue blocks?
4.
4 is right.
Good parrot.
He's chewing.
All right, I'll stop it there. So again, that's Alex the parrot. So yeah, you can see, he did a really good job of learning sort of that combinatorial aspect. So not just how many blocks or how many red things, but how many red blocks, and like putting those concepts together to form, a more complex idea, basically. One of the things he was also reported to do, so I guess he had like bananas and he had cherries before, and he knew those 2 words. And his caregiver presented him with something new. I think it was like an apple. And what he did, because he didn't have a word for apple, he had never seen it before, he combined the words cherry and banana and called it like chanana or something like that, like some combination of the 2. So it's showing that combinatorial thing again of like, okay, let's take these little bits and pieces of language and put them together to describe something new. So this one is the raven. I'm not sure what language he's speaking, but it's not English, so there's subtitles down here. I don't know how well you'll be able to read them, but he's basically giving this raven different commands and telling him to do different things. And the raven seems to very, understand these complex things. It's kind of like the video with Kanzi I was showing you earlier when he put the soap on the ball.
Сейчас покажу, что умеет мой ворон. Гоша, иди на пенек.
So he said, go to the stump.
Дай снег.
He said, give me snow.
Молодец. Дай
Give me
лапу.
a paw.
Молодец. Дай другую. Покажи средний палец.
He says, show me the
Гоша,
middle
неси
finger.
перчатку на дерево.
Take the glove to the
Перчатка
tree.
застряла на дереве. Достань, пожалуйста.
And then here he's telling him his glove is stuck, so to go get it for him.
Давай, давай. Давай, давай перчатку. Достать не могу. Давай, давай, давай. Молодец, молодец. На плечо иди. Скажи «А». Поцелуй. Молодец.
All right, so that's the raven. So again, pretty complex understanding of language there. All right, and then the last one, yeah, Alex, go ahead.
I honestly don't know how legit this is. I was recently talking to a very enthusiastic friend who seems to know about a lot about this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But she was talking about crows. And and she was saying that crows have the ability to somehow communicate within their social groups, which humans have been mean to them, and
Yes.
humans have been nice to them.
Yep. Yeah. I've heard the same thing, and I found like one article that, you know, it was like a peer-reviewed article that talked about it. It's funny because I was walking at Lake Sacagawea Park with, it was like me and my husband and our dogs, and there was like a crow in the path, and my husband was like kind of like encouraging my dog to like bark at it or something, and I was like, don't do that, the crow's gonna remember us and he's gonna be mad at us later. And he's like, that's not real, that doesn't happen. So I went and found like an article and sent it to him. I was like, no, this is totally real. So yeah, it's
there was a series of videos of a college student that actually took a picture of his professor's face as a mask, and he would be mean to the crows. And it's actually been able to be transferred generationally between crows, not just within the ones that are currently alive, but to their children.
Right.
And that professor for decades was being attacked.
No one do that to me, please.
I think it was a Nova documentary with BS. It was called The Murder of Crows.
Okay.
They went through and they did the whole thing, and they showed that it can do three-step problem solving too. So it can get a tool to get another tool to then complete the task.
Yeah, they're incredibly intelligent, the crows are, for sure. And I've heard also kind of the flip of that if you're like nice to a crow, like if you give it food or something, that it'll bring you like little shiny trinkets and share them with you and like be nice to you. So yeah, they seem to be very sociable and have good memory. Yeah, Devin.
My 8th grade history teacher, she would feed them. They later switched rooms, but it was when I was like a senior in high school. The same crow would come to the same room and take his little beak and like tap on the window while we were trying to learn math.
Yeah.
But he still thought Wilson was there.
Yeah, she's trying to come and get food.
So cute.
Yeah.
He'd bring her sticks and everything. It was great.
It's actually going to add upon the shiny thing. There was a man in New York that used the rooftops and trained crows to go and collect change and shiny objects off the ground to get food from him, and basically created a vending machine that when they dropped it in, it would drop the food, and he basically didn't work.
Yeah, he just made money off of it. It's probably like stealing jewelry from people, and yeah, that's funny. Yeah, there's a ton of examples. The crows and the ravens in particular seem to be incredibly intelligent, and as far as I know, all those things are true. I haven't heard anyone like debunk it or anything. Yeah.
So this is just a question. Why are mockingbirds not on the list?
I haven't heard anything specifically of them. There are so many examples of different species, and it's like I have to pick, but I've never heard the mockingbirds one. Is there something specific you're thinking of?
I was just wondering if they were similar in this way or not. That's all.
Yeah, they probably are. I know there's other examples of birds I use talking about memory, like the scrub jays, which live here. I had never seen a scrub jay until I moved here, because we don't have them in the Midwest. But yeah, but scrub jays, I mean, they gather like peanuts, and they like gather worms and stuff, and they'll hide them in very specific places. And they they'll only go back to it if they know that it's still good. Like the worms will decompose faster. So if it's been like a couple of days since they hit a worm, they won't go back to that spot because they know it's like bad now. So, a lot of these birds, they show very good like memory abilities. And they also, like I'm saying, seem to show pretty good language abilities as well. Yeah, lots of great examples. Dolphins and whales, kind of a similar story. So there seems to be a lot of, cases of dolphins and whales showing very complex sort of social things and language abilities. They're probably the least well studied just because of the logistical aspects of it. Like trying to study these species underwater, was obviously extremely expensive and time consuming. So they just haven't been pursued, I think, as much as some of the other species. This is just one example of them training dolphins to, they're kind of trying to start building like a rudimentary lexigram, kind of, sort of like they did with Kanzi. But again, trying to do that underwater is very difficult. All right, I'll stop it there. It kind of goes on, but it gets a little repetitive. So it's just showing, basically they have this board where they can point their echolocation to different shapes to get different things. So, like I said, very rudimentary at this point, but this, I don't know when this was made, but I'm sure they've like made progress since then to make this even more complex and intricate. I will say, I know dolphins and whales too also show, some of the things you guys are talking about with crows. So like they've shown that kind of cross-generational communication. So they have different, like hunting techniques that they will use, that they will pass on to their offspring through some form of communication. They also have like interesting social things. Like I've heard, this is one that I don't know if it's true, I haven't verified it, but I've read it in multiple places, that dolphins will use like pufferfish as almost like a recreational drug, because they have this like neurotoxin they release, but if it's consumed in small quantities, then they could basically be getting high off of it, and they'll like literally pass around a pufferfish to share. They are puff and passing. What was that?
I said dolphins are evil and weird. They'll actually also take eels
Mm-hmm.
or other fish, and even if they're dead, throw them around like a play toy.
Yeah. So that they can be very playful. Yes. Yeah, Devin.
I can send it to you if you want. There's an article kind of like that, but with sharks, and
Mhm.
they bite at the underwater internet cables because they like the shock. So you watch them come up, bite it, and thrash around and just swim away.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's.
So cute.
I know that you were talking about the hammerhead sharks and how they're like attracted to electricity, or they can sense it at least. And so they might be even like seeking it out, thinking it's like an electric eel or something. Or maybe that's at least where the behavior starts, and then they enjoy it and seek it out.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. I know like killer whales are, another example that have sort of passed on some of those like just weird random activities that they do, that they pass on through generations and two different cultures. They also have studied more like the, sort of intra-species communication, and they found that dolphins and certain species of whales, they have calls that like, they basically like have names for each other, and even like family names. So they have a certain call that, signifies their like little group or whatever. And then they also have unique individual names for each other as well that they use to communicate. So again, all kinds of very interesting, complex linguistic abilities in other species. And I would say probably our understanding of it is extremely limited. So the fact that we know this much, that we've revealed that these species can do this much, to me at least says that there's probably, infinitely more that they can do communication-wise, and we just haven't figured out the right methods to tap into that or to find what that is. I mean, it's kind of like I'm saying, if we can't even perceive phonemes of a different human language, I can't even tell the difference between the two Ds in Hindi, then why would I be able to, hear bird calls or hear dog barks or hear dolphin noises and hear the differences nuanced enough to be able to understand what they're, saying or communicating? So this is probably just scratching the surface of what other species are actually capable of. Okay.